Good evening, and welcome to the continuation of Blueprint Houston's series on the Next Million. I'm Joe Webb. I'm the host tonight of this week's Public Affairs Public Access session, and with us tonight are Michael Ariti, who is the Director of Capital Projects, Public Works for the City of Houston, and on my left, Stephen Costello, also an engineer, and he's the city's Chief Resilience Officer, and we probably know him better as the flood czar, to tell you the truth, along with Jim Hild, who is an architect and urban planner, Vice Chair of Blueprint Houston, and myself, I'm an architect and urban planner, and I'm a past chair of Blueprint Houston. And a bit of a backstory for those of you who are just kind of joining us for the first time. Blueprint Houston has advocated for years for the creation of a general plan for the city of Houston, and in September of 2015, that effort paid off when the city did adopt the project called Plan Houston. And Plan Houston documents not only a vision, but it also documents key goals for the city. It establishes 12 core strategies, 95 actions that are related goals that are instrumental to us as a city reaching our vision and making the city to be the city we want it to be, and as we work towards being a resilient city. And Blueprint Houston is now advocating for the completion of the evolution of Plan Houston through the development of those strategies and those particular actions set forth in the plan. And in order to get the word out, we've embarked on this series of hour-long television programs related to growth and development, transportation, which is really access and mobility, to neighborhoods, to housing, and tonight, infrastructure. And we started this back early part of the summer. And if you want to see this, there are copies of the previous sessions found on Blueprint Houston's website and on Houston Media Sources' YouTube page. And our initial session really explored holistically several of the factors that will impact how we accommodate the next 1 million people in the city. The region is going to get even more. I mean, the numbers I saw were that basically we would get about 3 million people in the region. Think of it as this way: the city of Los Angeles dropped on top of us. And so now we've got to think about how do we plan for our shared future, because it's important to us, it's important about the health of our city. And so tonight's panel will be our 6th program. It's devoted to infrastructure, how infrastructure impacts each of us, and most pointedly, the growth, development, and resilience of this city. And I need to let you know, and this is mainly to remind us, as we discuss tonight our topic, you can call in, ask a question, and we will endeavor to get to you as quickly as we can. And that phone number is 713-807-1794. And now to Jim.
Thank you, Joe, and welcome to our guests.
Thank you.
As Joe mentioned, the theme of our series has been the next million, and that refers to the expected growth in population that we anticipate for the city over the next 25 or 30 years. And I don't know when the slideshow is going to come up. There we go. So the focus of tonight's session is going to be infrastructure. Well, we've been, all of our topic areas have been in the context of planning for future growth and specifically for the next million. So if we go to the next slide, we see what the population projections are, that for the city of Houston is anticipated to grow from a little over 2 million today to a little over 3 million by about 2045. And if we look at Harris County, that's anticipated to grow an additional, 2 million total, including the million in the city of Houston. And when we look at the 8-county region, it's a total of 4 million people. So going from a little over 6 million people today to over 10 million. So overall, city all the way to region, looking at something well over 50% growth. So a significant amount of growth, and we've already got quite a number of people here today. So now, if we just focus on the city of Houston itself, just for the moment, and just kind of look at the question of how do we add another million people just within the city limits of Houston. If you go to the next slide, you'll notice this is kind of represents in the yellow the current city limits of Houston, and then the sort of pink area being the extraterritorial jurisdiction. annexation used to be how we would grow in the past. As more and more of the population went out to the suburbs, the city would just simply annex in those growth areas, and the city kept getting bigger in that way as well as growing in population. For a variety of reasons, some, I guess, political, annexation is really no longer possible. So we're kind of limited to the limits that we have now. And then, as we learned last year, if we go to the next slide, a significant portion of our county is, floodplain or flood prone. Since the experience of Harvey, we've begun looking again at, how wise it is to actually be developing in floodplains and possibly changing those rules. So, despite having a lot of growth pressures, we're talking about possibly taking some developable land off the table. So that's kind of a counterproductive trend, perhaps. If we look at the next slide, we also have significant amounts of the city that are protected in various ways. Places like River Oaks that are simply not going to get any denser. I mean, that's forever going to be large lots, single family development. We've got Memorial Park, areas like that that are not really going to be able to grow. But this image actually does show River Oaks and Memorial Park, but it also shows you the uptown area and the Westheimer corridor, for example, which are areas that are experiencing some significant turnover and infill potential. So yes, obviously there's growth possible within the city. If we go to the next slide, this is actually a very interesting graphic, which represents, this is from the planning department. And the size of the circles this is the platting activity over the last several years, the size of the circle being corresponding to the number of lots in each plat. And you can see that the circles within the yellow, the city limits, are actually fairly small. And that's primarily going to be things like, an old shopping center that gets cut up into lots, or, even an old house that becomes 2 or 3 townhouse lots. I mean, it's things of that scale. Large scale raw land subdivision is really, that game is kind of over within the city limits. It's still happening quite a bit, as you can see, in the county and some areas beyond that. But that's not really a big growth avenue for us anymore. And if we go to the next slide, so we have, within the region, if we look at Harris County and beyond, that kind of suburban raw land growth is still happening. And it's, pretty significant rate of growth around Fulshire and Cinco Ranch areas and so forth. But those areas, as the edge gets farther and farther away from the center, and we keep trying to connect the two together, widening the freeways, et cetera, we're beginning to find out that that's, there are limits to that particular strategy. And then, of course, within the city limits, we're getting a significant amount of densification, which has a lot of friction points as well. We're all familiar with the Ashby high-rise and, putting a high-rise building in the middle of in this case, well-to-do residential neighborhood that was not taking kindly to it at all. So these, growth is definitely causing some pressures, both within and without. Next. So our position at Blueprint Houston has been, we've got to be a little bit more proactive about this. We need a plan. We've got to be thinking, business as usual of just kind of letting the market figure things out. We'll work to a point, but we're getting to a point where we have a scale of a problem that requires a little bit more, multi-jurisdictional coordination, planning ahead, thinking ahead, that sort of thing. And we actually have a plan. We've been advocating for a plan as an organization for the last, 15 years or so. And about 3 or 4 years ago, we actually succeeded. The city of Houston adopted a general plan, or at least the outline of one. It's got some good stuff in it, but it really needs to be fleshed out. We've got to keep building on it. It has, for example, some of the goals related to infrastructure, sustain quality infrastructure. That's one of the core strategies. And there are a number of actions that we can't read this slide, and I don't intend to do that. But the point is that there are a number of really good actions that were outlined within Plan Houston, but they're all kind of very general things like, we have to provide efficient, effective infrastructure. Okay, great. That sounds like a good idea. How are we going to really do that? And who's paying for it, and how do we plan ahead and get it all done? But we've got 2 great guests today that are going to help us answer those questions, I think. So that's where pretty much at the end of the line there. So the opening discussion, if we can kind of go back to, look at this from 30,000 feet and think, okay, how are we going to get another 1 million people in this town? And if we look at the topic of infrastructure specifically, by that we mean, for the benefit of those who perhaps are not civil engineers, infrastructure includes the following categories. So streets and sidewalks, obviously. Utilities like water, sewer, storm, gas, electric. Some of that's provided by the city, some of that by private utilities. Stormwater and floodplain management is another big category. And sanitation, things like water and sewer treatment, solid waste management. So those are kind of the big categories of things we're talking about. And perhaps I'll just throw it open, I don't know, if maybe a jump ball. How are we going to get another 1 million people in the city of Houston?
I have no
and get
idea.
the infrastructure.
I have no idea. And to think about dropping LA right here in this region, you would consider it really gridlock everywhere.
Yeah.
So, in terms of, let's talk transportation first.
Sure.
So obviously I'm not from Texas, you can tell by the way I talk. I'm from New York, accustomed to mass transit, accustomed to rail. I personally have always felt that this region really needs to have commuter rail. The problem has always been, when you look at our transportation network, is we don't have one central employment center. We have multiple employment centers throughout the region, and making it connected so that it's effective. And then there's always been this issue of, well, okay, if you get them to the employment center, how do you disperse them, which is the distribution part of the transit system. That had always been a challenge. And so, to me, I would like to see us start looking at that as probably one of the critical parts of accommodating another 1 million people in the city.
Right.
Is how do we handle our transportation network, both in terms of on the metro side as well as on the city side, which is our major thoroughfares. I don't know, Michael, what do you think about that?
Yeah, the right-of-way, what we call the infrastructure right-of-way, is competing for a lot of views, as you mentioned. Right. It's a utility corridor. It is the bicycle. It's the pedestrian. It's the vehicle, and it is everything that is competing constantly. So, how do you fit that many people in this constrained area? And I've heard it, and you don't want to call it pure density, but it is, it's densification and providing alternative ways of providing those services for water, sewer, even alternative modes of transportation like transit and bicycles. So that's the challenge we got, is as it's densifying and growing a little bit higher, how do you accommodate those things? So.
Yeah, and I also think it's there's also this issue of complete streets, which is really on the transportation side.
Correct.
Is the challenge of accommodating the bicycle and the walkability of an area. And in a lot of these areas where we want to accomplish that, there's significant cost to do that. Obviously you want to acquire some more land. Most of the land across these major thoroughfares are commercial properties. So you're not paying by the square foot, you're paying for it by the square inch. And so those are some of the biggest challenges we have. So I don't have a good answer relative to the transportation side, but it is a challenge. I do think that, and I know that in the public works, in our design manual for the city, that there are provisions for those design elements as we are improving the parts of the city. The real question is do we have the political will to accomplish building complete streets? Do we have the finances available to build a complete street? So those are some of the things that we need to talk about, because I think the motivating factor here is the dollar. Is where are the funds coming from? Are we, first of all, willing to tax ourselves? I wouldn't say tax, but are we willing to invest ourselves into the community with additional funds and maybe leverage that with federal and state dollars? And so those are some of the challenges that we have when we're dealing with these types of changes, because we are talking about change, and we all know that human nature is adverse to change. And really what we try to do is, what we have to do, let's say even on a complete street corridor, is if you build something, the public accepts it pretty quickly. It's just a matter of getting them to accept it before you do the investment to get them to invest in it.
Or to understand what the investment really is, truthfully, because I think some of that's just the physical communication of what does this really, what are the impacts, what's it going to do for us, how's it going to help us, because it's like you're talking about, it's not only how do we pay for it, but once we've paid for it, how does it help stimulate other economic activity? Because I think that's some of the things we haven't talked much about.
Okay, so there's two things you just dwelled on that you know, as a former council member, the things I observed. This issue of communication to the general public, we as engineers are terrible communicators. We're implementers. And so I think we've always felt short in communicating what our goals are and our objectives are to the community.
Right.
So that's the first thing. The other is if we do invest in communication efforts, then we get chastised for spending too much money on communication and not enough on infrastructure. So, see what I'm saying? So we got to find a balance. But I think the public trust issue is really an extremely important part of this dynamics right now.
Oh yes, definitely. I mean, in the process that we went through with just getting to the outline of Plan Houston, it was that too, to say the least. But it also comes back to understanding that what we do with infrastructure also impacts whatever growth and development is going to happen in this, because you guys have got to be out in front of it some way to help it happen. But you've also at the same time got to be back here in the back end maintaining and updating.
That's right.
So that new services and continued services keep going forward. So that's part of the budget challenge you're talking about too.
Right. Yeah, and Michael is in charge of the CIP. Michael?
I would tell you, in my experience at least, being at Public Works previously and going out and coming back again, there is a definite shift in the way that we're communicating to the public. One of the fortunate things I worked on was the Lower Westheimer pre-engineering study,
Yes.
which I believe was the Cadillac version of the city communication effort.
Yeah.
You know, yes, we are going out, but we're really looking into these, actually going and soliciting initially with the community, this context-sensitive type of implementation where you are asking and prioritizing what are the critical things that this particular corridor is looking for, and coming up with a little bit of out of the box instead of just following the design manual.
Right.
Here it is, this is the minimum requirement. But looking at, you know, contextually, what is the best implementation that would work?
Well,
It could be
Since
prior.
it's my neighborhood,
Okay.
you guys have done a pretty good job, to tell you the truth.
They have. I can't take credit for it. You know,
The city has. I did. I was just the paid consultant.
The other thing that Jim brought up is, you know, in terms of densification, I think what we have to remind everybody is that, you know, the city is a young city, but it's not young. It's really an older city. And what Public Works is struggling with now is upgrading outdated, inadequate existing infrastructure.
Right.
Which really takes the lion's share of their financial efforts. And to be able to program into the changes that's going to result from all these people showing up is sort of the, you know, that's the next step. So something's got to sacrifice if we're going to move money, shift money around to implement one side of future improvements versus updating existing infrastructure for our existing residents.
Yeah.
Well, how did we get where we are? Because we are a very low density city. And to me, that would, you know, if you just look at the math of it, if you've got people spread out, you need more roads to connect things. You have to run more miles of water pipe to serve, you know, the same number of people as you might say in a denser city like New York and so forth. So we've kind of gotten ourselves into a fairly expensive corner. But it would seem to me that there is an argument to be made that when we talk about densification, that actually gives us an advantage over, let's say, out in the county, which has to build the infrastructure from scratch. We just need to figure out how to get more capacity out of what we've got. Now, that's a different problem, but in some ways it may be a less expensive problem. Am I wrong about that? Or?
No, I think you're valid in some regards. There is infrastructure in place that can automatically accommodate densification. And then there are obviously other areas of the city that can't, that has to be upgraded. I mean, if you think about the challenges that Public Works has right now on the wastewater side, they're in the process of negotiating with EPA over a consent decree relative to the Clean Water Act. And because our system is so large, as you described, because we're a wrought out area, it's a challenge to try to meet some of those federal requirements that EPA might be using as an example from, let's say, a much smaller densified city, which really those criteria don't really apply to a city of our size. So that's one of the challenges that we have. I think transportation is the biggest challenge that we're going to have with these new people. I think it's also the issue of drainage. Obviously, that's what I do for a living. A lot of is the drainage aspects of it, because with densification becomes more runoff, and if we're not improving the existing infrastructure, then we're just creating more flooding prone problems. I remember, and just for open disclosure, coming from private practice, I made a living, and a very good one, at land developing. And I told this to the mayor the other day. You know, Mayor, when I was in private practice, every green space to me was available for a house. And now, being in the bureaucratic world for several years, I've come to the conclusion that there are certain areas that we probably shouldn't put a house on. And that we should think of an alternative use that blends well with the quality of life of the community. That's an alternative to actually, God forbid, put a house on it. So, I've sort of kind of changed my view of how development occurs in the city now. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
That's a very good.
I think it's good, because we as a city have got to rationalize where we make those decisions. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do. I mean, telling somebody that maybe they can't build there or whatever, but we've got, and we maybe can figure a way to, somebody can build, but it doesn't impact. There's so many variables there that it's going to get confusing, I would imagine. But and that's where I think if once we kind of get a path set and a policy set, then we make it easier. And that's back to the communication, but also you guys doing homework and understanding where are the pitfalls, what's the issues with this part of the city versus that part of the city, and the question is, I have always meant to ask, and I'll ask it now, do we actually know how old each segment of a street is, when it ought to be replaced, how many miles of streets we've got? I mean, and you alluded to this, because the size of this place versus what most of the governments the feds are used to dealing with, we're 654 square miles, or whatever it is. That's half the size of Rhode Island.
Yeah, we have over.
And we're a city,
and we have over 16,000 lane miles of streets.
Okay, somebody does know. I figured you did. So,
you probably know how many miles of water pipe we have in sewer, and
About 6,000 miles of water and 7,000 wastewater.
Average
3,000 miles of storm sewers.
And average age of
It's a
that?
huge system.
Yeah.
But I will tell you one point. You talk about challenges about infrastructure. Water and traffic and everything does not know jurisdictional boundaries.
Right.
And I would commend Steve on this as well, because really all those jurisdictional responsibilities in the region working together to come up with a plan is probably the biggest challenge we got.
Oh, yeah.
And it is, it's upon us to work with Metro and, all the stakeholders that could resolve all these challenges that we got and getting them together and working. So
I think the other thing is that there are a lot of redevelopment pressures that you described, and redevelopment is going to have to occur to accommodate for this million people coming into the city. We don't have a crystal ball on where that's going to occur. If we had the crystal ball and if we had the funds, we would be investing in advance of the redevelopment occurring. Yeah. So, the challenges that we're having right now is that as a public works department, in particular on infrastructure, is that they're reacting to pressures from redevelopment rather being proactive.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the challenges that we have on that side. So but we do know kind of where they're developing now.
yeah.
And so there should be some thought about distributing funds to accommodate for that future development. The other thing is as engineers, we're problem solvers. So we go where the problems are and we invest in those problem areas. But there is a political underfluence in there as well. And we have to be mindful of that. We have 11 districts, and each district would like to have their equal share of the investment. And in certain situations, well, is that the right thing to do? Or maybe take this total pot of money that we have, take some of it to apply for maybe future development and regional type stuff, and then take the balance and distribute it equally across the districts. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There's always that political undertone in terms of the investment. I've been doing a lot of talking about Harvey and the impacts of Harvey, but what Harvey has done for this region is opened up a source of money that was never available to us, which is the federal dollars.
Right.
And particularly with federal HUD dollars. So we're about to get $1.15 billion from HUD to the city for housing-related improvements. Now that could be home buyout, home improvements, relocation. Some of these multifamily facilities are in flood-prone areas, just to buy them out and put them and build a new
somewhere else
for them. Right.
Yeah.
On the other side, we're about to get, we anticipate an equal amount from HUD for mitigation infrastructure. And so that's kind of where we would take this money and address some of the issues you're talking about. Okay, mitigation for current flooding, but also mitigation for future impacts. So we're pretty excited about that.
So $1 billion sounds like a lot of money, but how does it fit with the scale of the problem as we know it?
So we are waiting for HUD to put out what they call is a Notice of Financial Availability, a NOFA is what we call it, with the guidelines.
Right.
So we've been to Washington a couple of times talking to HUD officials. The challenge that we have with HUD is they're not in the infrastructure business, they're in the housing business. So they're struggling internally as, okay, how do we define mitigation and infrastructure? And so we're not quite sure how that's going to fit in just yet.
Interesting.
Out of chaos comes opportunity.
That is interesting that they're struggling with that. Well, you would have thought with as much stuff has gone on, they would have at least addressed that at some point in time.
Well, I think what they're going to be doing is they're going to be bringing in agencies like FEMA, like the Corps, who do infrastructure, and have a frank discussion about, okay, what do we think would be a good investment on HUD side that addresses infrastructure? We've also been up there saying, well, we think it's this. Obviously, we're trying to self-promote how we want to invest it. So that's what we've been working on.
It's interesting. It's that you talk about how to bring those two seem like very disparate things together. I don't know how you could take them apart, though, because when I was writing the notes for this session tonight, I said, what is infrastructure really? Well, it's really all the stuff that nobody notices until it doesn't work.
Yes,
and
absolutely right.
Absolutely.
But it's not just engineering. It's strategic planning. It's land use. It's anticipating the future. It's being resilient. It's all. I mean, you really cannot split that little ball of activities into pieces and just focus on one thing. You have to kind of look at this thing very globally.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that because one of my PowerPoints I borrowed an exhibit from an organization out of Denver, and it's an exhibit that shows the connectivity of everything as it relates to a particular event. And this is like a shock to the environment. So if you look at a flooding event, what impact it has, and it impacted everything you just described. The lack of planning, the lack of infrastructure investment, poor communication, everything we've just talked about is interrelated to everything. So you're right, we can't really pull one out and say this is what we're focusing on, but that's what we focus on.
It is exactly what we focus on. And we face that challenge, in our daily activities of implementing an infrastructure project. It's, how do you separate the street from the drainage facility? It is part and parcel of the same thing.
And you don't, really.
I mean, you're regrading a road, you are improving drainage. You're getting the water away from the center of the street. So
Yeah, and we've all heard those stories about, well, we just finished repaving this street, and then 6 months later, we're digging it up to replace the storm sewer. I'd like to think that doesn't happen
It doesn't
often
happen
as it.
anymore. You and I are the age that we remember Richmond Avenue. They don't do that anymore. They spend a lot of time making sure that doesn't happen again for that reason.
Better tools.
Yeah, good. Glad to hear it. So, can we continue to add capacity? I mean, how are we doing that? Maybe you can tell me this. You're responsible for the capital budget, I guess, capital projects. How much? What would you say is the percentage of the money you spend between fixing and upgrading, or just maintaining what you've got versus actually new stuff? Do you have a quick ballpark number there?
Actually, most of the funding we got goes into repair and rehabilitation.
Most of it? Okay.
They are very localized improvements that make a bigger impact. But yes, what we do in our portion is the larger scale projects that you would typically call a capital improvement project. But most of our effort and resources are actually allocated to repair and rehabilitation where we can make them.
But isn't it on the, let's say for instance your trunk lines will accommodate what you might think would be future development type situations. It's not like you're going to build an infrastructure to accommodate existing conditions. There is a little bit of planning involved up front before your consultants pick what improvement they want to put in place.
That's correct. That's correct. So in terms of capacity, I mean, what you would consider as a widening job?
Yeah.
Okay. Those are, typically about, in the past it's been about 34% of the CIP used to go there, but now we are actually concentrating a little more into drainage-related improvements and projects than in the future. Now, if you look at the next 5+5 CIP program, there's a little bit less of major thoroughfare projects than it used to be in the past.
So you're thinking more smaller projects that can be delivered quicker?
Yeah, we have 4 categories of a street, drainage, wastewater, and water, really. If you look at the CIP project. This is just really how the project was initiated. With a purpose of need for. So the purpose of need for capacity is getting a little bit less in the future years. So.
And what's the primary funding source? Is it mostly just, is it bond funds, or is it just general funds?
You want to take our rebuild?
Sure. So on the water and sewer side, that's our primary enterprise fund. And so on the water and sewer, our water rates pay for that.
Okay.
And a portion of the water and sewer enterprise fund is bond funded, and a portion of it is pay as you go. So they have sort of a blend.
Okay.
On the street and drainage program, prior to the passage of Rebuild Houston in 2010, it was solely strictly bond funds. And then what we did was, and prior to that, they were spending somewhere between less than $100 million annually on street and drainage improvements. So once Rebuild Houston was passed, we converted that bond program into pay-as-you-go, and recognized the fact that once we went to pay-as-you-go, we were going to have to supplement some additional monies. That's where the drainage fee came.
Right.
So the drainage fee part of Rebuild Houston is to allow us to bridge the gap. So for instance, we've been spending probably a little over $200 million in street and drainage works, already double than what we were pre-2010. And somewhere in the next 6 or 7 years, we'll spend another $200 million annually. So almost $400 million a year. So the money is just going to go skyrocket.
Big change.
So the city internally, when we set up Rebuild Houston and its funding sources, we created essentially another enterprise fund.
Yeah.
We don't call it an enterprise fund, but it's really an enterprise fund.
Well, because it's fee funded.
Correct.
Dedicated to.
Yeah.
It's a dedication. That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Interesting.
Well, what about drainage? I mean, that was one of the big topics, obviously. That was top of mind as of about a year ago. I know we're talking about, adding another reservoir is part of the...
Yeah, I could talk a little bit about that. So, as a professional, for years, as professional organizations have talked to municipalities, whether it's a city, the county, or anywhere else in the region, we kept advocating for additional funding for infrastructure, particularly streets and drainage.
Yeah.
And usually the criticism we got was, well, you're just self-serving because you're going to get the design work. Well, sure, you want us to design work because you don't want me working on your teeth and having a dentist design your streets.
Right.
And then the other issue, which was a little frustrating, was the fact that floods didn't occur year over year before 2015. They were a number of years apart, and they weren't as broad as Harvey was. So, for instance, the Memorial Day flood in 15 and in October were isolated areas. So what happens is the isolated areas were impacted, but the rest of the community wasn't. So everyday life was fine.
Yeah.
Okay. And then even if you got flooded, let's say in 2001 during Allison or in 2009, several years later, you're back to your normal day and normal life.
Yeah.
Well, 15, 16, and 17 sort of changed that sentiment about infrastructure and flooding. And so what's happening now is that when Harvey occurred, it impacted the entire community.
Yeah.
Whether it was the west side, whether it was the north side, Kingwood had never been flooded before, and all the other areas that we would expect when you get that much rain would flood. So it sort of changed the conversation with the public.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the reasons why we talk about rebuild and where the investment's coming from.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why the county bond issue passed so easily, was that people said, hey, we really do need to fund infrastructure on the drainage side. The challenge that we have is managing expectations in terms of project delivery.
Right.
Because what happens is, and I'll give you an example, on Brays Bayou, the federal project's almost done. But the Brays Bayou project only provides a level of protection of an 8-inch rainfall event.
Yeah.
And how many times is an 8-inch rainfall exceeded? Quite a bit.
Yeah.
And yet the people that live right next to that project feel they're going to feel safe. We have to make sure that the public understands what we're delivering to them in terms of drainage improvements and how we're going to protect them. The other issue is that people don't understand that they can get flooded whether it's from bayou overflow or from poor infrastructure. I'm pointing the mic.
Yeah.
Poor infrastructure. So whenever Russ
What, it doesn't drain fast enough?
Yeah. So whenever Russ Poppy and I are out
Yeah.
talking to the community, he's the executive director of flood control, we ask the community at large that we're talking to 2 questions. The first one is, how many people know what watershed they live in? And you'd be surprised how few do. And then we ask the second question, how many of y'all have flood insurance?
Yeah.
And it's less than 40% of the audience. And we remind them that, you can get flooded either from a bayou where you're in the floodplain or from poor municipal infrastructure where you're not even in a floodplain.
Yeah.
And that was evident during Harvey, because 40% of the people that flooded were not in a regulatory floodplain.
Yeah.
So they were impacted by urban flooding or some other sources,
Yeah.
whether it be the reservoir overflows or whatever. What we see happening on the 3rd reservoir is that we're relying on the Corps to do what is called a 216 study. That's an acronym they use for when they reevaluate an existing project that they've done in the past, and they're looking at the operation and maintenance of it. So the scope of that 216 study will include an analysis of whether or not a 3rd reservoir will help the benefits of Addicks and Barker, and whether or not there's other improvements they need to do to the operation of the dams, or whether they need to do some downstream improvements on Buffalo Bayou. So that's all going to be part of a 216 study. So here's the problem with the 216 study. It's going to take 3 years. And then after 3 years, maybe a project will show up. So what the region is asking is, well, is there a way for locally that we build the 3rd reservoir? We don't want to own it and maintain it, but we'll build it on behalf of the government and let them take it over for maintenance.
Yeah.
But what would it do for the region? I mean, if we had unlimited money, do we actually know how to solve the problem?
So I would say that if we had unlimited money, yeah, we do know how to solve the problem. But we have to think out of the box.
Yeah.
Okay. So for instance, if we had unlimited money, and I can go out and buy all the right-of-way I wanted to, I would make every bayou as large as I can. Okay, so what does that do? That has a detrimental impact to the quality of life of a particular neighborhood, because you could literally decimate a neighborhood by buying all this right away. And we have all of the communities are built right up to the current channels. So how do we provide that level of protection without doing something like that? So we're now looking at a tunnel option. And so this is kind of unique, because when it was first brought to Harris County.
So you're talking additional flow capacity, basically.
Yes,
Okay.
Yeah.
low capacity.
Okay.
So you can still leave the bayous where they are. You can still have development up to where it is currently today, and you just add a tunnel system to complement and supplement the existing bayou capacity
Interesting.
and overflow.
Interesting.
And so years ago, we always thought that tunnels were impractical for Houston area because of the soil conditions we have.
Right.
But the tunnel concept has really changed over the years. The technology has. And it's a viable alternative right now. Expensive, don't get me wrong. It's expensive. You said I had unlimited money, didn't you?
Just for discussion purposes.
So for
yes.
the audience's purposes, it's estimated to be about $100 million a mile for a tunnel. And we're talking about a 40-foot diameter tunnel, 150 feet in the ground.
And how many miles of that?
So in order to, so that's what flood control is going to do in their bond application or bond program. They have $20 million set aside for a feasibility study. They won't spend all $20 million just for the study. But I mean, what it is they're going to be looking at where would we put maybe a trunk line and then put laterals off of it. So if you think about it, if it's that deep in the ground, you can literally put the alignment along a major thoroughfare or underneath a highway.
Yeah.
And then have feeder lines going out to the other streams. So if you think about it, maybe you have something coming from Addicts and Barker going right down I-10, which is what the former director, Art Story, had proposed back in the 90s.
Yeah.
But this would be a tunnel, be deeper. And then you have arms coming off that go to Braze, that go to Cypress Creek, that go to White Oak Bay. See what I'm saying? So there's something that could work. And that's really thinking out of the box, because I think that's what the community wants now. They want us to be thinking out of the box and not doing what we have done in the past.
Well, it's not unlike what was proposed years ago for where the confluence of Buffalo Bayou and White Oak come together is creating that channel.
Oh, now you're talking about my favorite project. We can talk about that. I'll fill up another hour.
But the key is it starts relieving pressure at the back pressure is what it starts relieving for those two bayous just by this one simple adjustment.
Right, that's called the North Canal.
Yeah, the North Canal. But not cheap, but still, like you said, it's thinking outside of the box. It's looking at other ways to how do we solve this problem. So, yeah, I mean, so they will actually start this.
So to talk a little bit about the North Canal, it just happens I just came from a meeting with the Texas Department of Emergency Management and FEMA. We are applying for a federal grant, a hazard mitigation grant for the North Canal.
Oh, wow.
And the North Canal is a diversion canal in downtown Houston of diverting White Oak across Buffalo Bayou. It'll lower the flood levels downtown by almost 4 feet.
I knew it was significant. I didn't realize it was that much.
And then there's another canal, which we call the South Canal, underneath the future location of 59. So we would have two canals. And then upstream, we're proposing some improvements near Heights and I-10. So that whole series of projects would protect over 1,000 structures, whether they're downtown structures or residential structures upstream on White Oak.
Wow.
It's really a game changer. That's thinking out of the box. So the purpose of our meeting with FEMA today was to say, hey, this is a viable project, and we really want to deliver it timely. So we're working to try to go through the federal regs to try to deliver the project. This is going to be a project that's going to get built. And it's been on the books for like 15,
forever,
20 years.
yeah.
Well,
Wow.
I remember Art Story when he first proposed it. Everybody kind of went, okay. And sure enough, I'm glad to see that because it's been talked and talked about. I was going to flip a little while ago to the water issue because that's what I think most people don't understand is, and we were talking about this before you guys joined us, is that no major reservoirs have been built since like Conroe, Lake Livingston, the city of Houston. If we put another 1 million people, that's another 1 million people needing
Or 4 million
water.
for the region, don't forget.
And the region, and since we probably supply most of the water for the region, we're talking about supplying water for those 4 million people. And and Steve was telling us earlier that we've done some pretty serious long-term planning, and we probably, what was it, 2060?
Well, we think what I've seen, this was years ago when the prior Public Works Director was presenting some analysis to the TTI Committee of City Council, that we have enough water supply when you include Lake Houston, Lake Conroe, and Lake Livingston to accommodate for the future growth of the city in 2060.
Okay.
And so the real question is okay, here it is 2018. 2060 is not that far away.
Yeah.
And so what are we going to do beyond that?
Yeah.
And that's a viable question, what are we going to do beyond that?
But actually, that sounds like we're in great shape.
Compared.
Not that your question isn't valid, but compared to, say, let's say the state of Texas.
Oh, yes.
How are they?
Yeah.
And to say nothing of the entire western United States, which has been oversubscribed with, surface water since, 50 years ago, yet they still keep growing, and I don't know how they can continue to do that. I think probably in the state of Texas we have, a sort of a capacity of horizon that's probably considerably less than 2060. Does anybody know? Or?
Oh, I have no idea.
Yeah.
I don't. But the Public Works is in the process of really spending a lot of money. I mean, you're building the largest surface water treatment plant in the country.
Yeah.
These
Right
water
now.
purification
That's the
plant.
east
That's
side?
correct.
Right, and you borrowed money from the Texas Water Development Board to build the canal from Lake Livingston down to Lake Houston. So
Close by.
it's about a couple of $100 million, is it not?
Correct. Yes, and several transmission lines, as we mentioned, partnership with other regional water authorities, all the way back to the Fort Bend Regional Water Authority as well. So this treatment plant is going to be serving, people on the west side of Houston as well. So, yes.
So that really, part of that capacity is then really taking us to the point that we're getting away from well-type water completely, and we were all back to surface water then. So it's basically
correct.
what I guess I'm understanding. So
The subsidence problem
Yeah.
has always been, and Houston has done well. I think by 2025, when the Northeast Water Purification Plant is installed, we'll meet that 60% or something
Oh, wow.
Of requirement. But still, there is the ultimate goal of 80% of.
Yeah, we'll never be totally surface water.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, it just makes sense because you have periods of drought, so you want to make sure you do have
other
well water
resources, yeah.
capabilities.
Yeah, that's actually a good point, because as I was thinking about this, I said, well, okay, if you have reservoirs and they're really performing two functions, I guess. Some of it is water supply and some of it is flood control, but those are actually competing, because if you think of it in terms of water supply, well, you want to keep the reservoir pretty full, but if you want flood control, you want some spare capacity in that reservoir. So how do you really balance those two things?
Yeah,
Or
and
do you
it's
just wait for what you don't know if it's going to be a drought or if it's going to be a flood?
So it's a good point. The other purpose of our meeting today with FEMA was we also have an application in to add another structure to Lake Houston Dam to give us the opportunity to lower water levels in advance of an extreme event.
Okay, yeah, there's
Ah.
yeah.
Okay.
So here's the challenge
Yeah.
that we were trying to explain to the federal agency is that it is a water supply facility. It's not a
Yeah.
detention pond.
Right.
And so the problem is that we are subject to violation of water rights
Interesting, yeah.
if we discharge too much water downstream, because we're supposed to be storing the water for our
Even if we're relatively certain that
Yes.
supply isn't going to be a problem.
So right now we have a temporary agreement with TCEQ, which is the agency that regulates our water issues.
Right.
That because of Harvey, they used Harvey as this emergency operation until we finish up some stuff we're doing up on Lake Houston and the West Fork. But once we're done there, we have to have some type of long-range agreement with the state agency on how we handle water, particularly in case of a flood.
In an emergency.
Yeah, well, right now, if we discharge too much, we have to pay a substantial penalty for doing that.
Interesting.
Interesting. So we don't get a certain grace period to, hopefully we were right about that tropical storm. Yeah, that is, and
Well,
we'll be right back up to snuff before you.
So I was reminded by the Public Works Director that we've lowered the water level about 4 times now. We did it in April, we did it 4th of July, and 2 other times. And fortunately, it filled back up. So what obviously Public Works is worried about is, well, if we lower it and then it doesn't
fill
Yeah,
back
yeah.
up.
then we all have a problem because
Right.
not only are we servicing our clients, you're also servicing those other regional water authorities. So
Correct.
we have to make sure we provide their supply.
That's right. And infrastructure growth it's not something that you can initially think about and build it out.
Yeah.
Initially, it has to be planned.
Yeah.
Dare I say the word? Okay.
No,
So-
you made there. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But it has to be
Yeah.
planned that it's
Right.
progressively
Right.
meeting the demand that is needed
Sure, sure.
for everything else. And even water transmission lines, you can't just go build a huge pipeline or you're going to start having, quality
Yeah.
issues with the water as well. So it is something, it's tricky. You're estimating a little and you're trying to catch up with it as you go along.
So do you guys, Kleinberg and others have been doing for years projections of growth and all that. Do you guys actually follow that on a regular basis? How does that filter into your process of making that decision on where growth is and how much growth?
Yeah, it's very hard. It's something, particularly in a zoneless thing, you can't really predict what kind of change you're going to have for each site. But we do have permitting systems, even for utilities, that when a development comes and wants to convert, then you are assessed, what kind of demand you're going to get and
Right.
impact fee and everything that would translate into the infrastructure back again as a region. So, yeah, most of our expenditure on capital projects, I'll be honest with you, it is really upgrading old infrastructure.
systems.
Yeah. We have really old water lines that are old and have a lot of maintenance problems. So we concentrate, based on those leaks and constant service requests to kind of guide us into upgrading that as we go along.
Yeah, and it's interesting because what the public doesn't know about our business is that we have certain standards. And as years go on, engineers learn more and more, standards change.
Right.
And so what Public Works is doing is going back and upgrading old infrastructure that was built according to standards during those days,
Back then, yeah.
but don't comply with current standards.
Right.
And as Michael was saying, when he's doing water and sewer infrastructure, their minimum sizes will accommodate quite a bit more than what's already using the facility. And what they're doing is they're trying to replace some older lines.
Right.
On the drainage side, you'll find in some of the older neighborhoods near where we live, the storm sewer lines are 12 and 15 inch.
Oh, they're
18-inch
small,
lines,
yeah.
where our minimum size is 24. And so those are the challenges that we have in some of these, in our neighborhoods, where we're seeing single cottages being built as townhouses, getting more runoff, and our system is not handling it, and it's because it's an inadequate system.
Yeah.
And we have to upgrade them. So that's why the lion's share of their resources are for the older systems to try to bring them up to current standards.
Going in, and so what you're doing then is watching platting activity, permitting activity, those kinds of things. Because like Jim was saying, we're really we're subdividing smaller tracts, but we're not aggregating into bigger tracts because a lot of times there's no way to do it. So you're having to do a really fine-grained watch
Yep.
to make those kinds of decisions.
That's right.
Well, I think that's an example of what you were talking about a little earlier, where that neighborhood, the runoff may just simply not be able to get through the system fast enough, and the fact that you have this north canal or whatever it is, that won't help the situation at all, because the water's not even getting there. It's being held up by just the local storm sewers in the street that just simply can't drain until such point as they back up and then it flows over land, I guess. But,
Yeah, and it was interesting because every once in a while when I'm publicly speaking, I use a pun that's not intended to, but I say the watershed moment was was 1984.
Yeah.
And in 1984 is when the local agencies, flood control and the city, adopted detention requirements,
Yeah.
and also adopted what we call sheet flow. to making sure that water gets out of the neighborhood and to the receiving stream before flooding houses.
Right.
In a lot of our older neighborhoods, they never looked at that. I mean,
Yeah.
they didn't have LIDAR and all the technical data that we have, the resources we have now.
Yeah.
And so we have neighborhoods like in the Meyer Lane area where the streets are below the banks of the bayou. So when the bayou overflows, it fills up like a bathtub. And it has to wait for the bayou to go down before the water gets
Right.
down. And so that's where our biggest challenge is in some of these areas where we won't be able to change that effect. So what do you have to do? You either have to oversize the lines in the community or increase the capacity of the bayou
Yeah.
to minimize the amount of times it ponds in there.
Or quite possibly both.
Or both, which is what we're doing. And also, if someone's building a new house, we ask them to elevate
the house.
up an elevation.
Right.
Because we know we can't solve the total problem.
Right. Well, we basically got a couple of minutes, and so we always try to offer our guest kind of closing statement, thoughts, ideas on our topic. So I'm going to open to either one of you.
You want me to go or do you want to go?
Go for it.
Well, I'm the next politician. I'll
I
take
know,
it all the
yeah,
time. You know
I'm
that.
sure you will.
So I'll take the opportunity to talk a little bit about Rebuild Houston because that's Proposition A.
Right.
And as a city employee, I can't tell people how to vote, but I can encourage them to research Proposition A, which is just a reauthorization of Rebuild, which is our enterprise fund for streets and drainage.
Right.
And we really need those resources so Michael and his team can deliver the projects that we want them to deliver. So I want everyone to go out and do some research. If they have any questions, your audience can really reach out to my office. Or Michael's office, and we're happy to answer any questions. But
Yeah.
Or give you information.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
So you'll
make
have
sure
facts.
make sure you go out and vote. And by the way, all those propositions are at the bottom of the ballot.
Okay.
But thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you
Thank
both
you.
for being here, and we've still got a little bit of time. So, anything in particular, especially on capital projects?
Yes, I just wanted to give a shout out to the 4,000 employees of Public Works that serve the city
Good.
on a daily basis. You're absolutely correct. Our good job is when nobody notices us. So, so they do
Well,
a good
like
job.
we said earlier, nobody pays attention till it doesn't work.
Right.
That's for sure. But yeah, this I think is going to generate another session, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, we didn't even get a chance to talk about resilience.
I know.
We just do this all over
Just
again.
all of this stuff. So we will be back, and we've got about a plus or minus a minute. So we actually hope all of you out there will continue to follow us. We've had some really good feedback, and surprising how many people actually are following us. Our goal is to stay on the second Thursday of every month. We'll be back at you to let you know. And if you want to know a little more about Blueprint Houston, go look us up at blueprinthouston.org and you can find out. And like I said earlier, if you would like to watch some of the previous sessions, Houston Media Source has them on their Facebook page. Our website also has them there. And we're really glad that basically you've been able to join us. And signing out, and go out and enjoy this gorgeous weather, because we've actually got fall for the first time in a while. Thank you both again for being with us tonight.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. Thank you.
Okay.